Welcome to another edition of the Hail to Michigan podcast. I'm your host tonight, Matt. Ronnie is unable to join us tonight, so it'll just be me and Contown. Contown, how you doing?
Doing good. Looking forward to some real Big Ten football this weekend. 12:30. We got Nebraska, Northwestern, the ever expanding borders of the Big Ten, reaching all the way out to Dublin, Ireland. So you can feel it. It's close. Sitting in my place, looking out at the rain here in Detroit, and just a lot of anticipation. You can feel it in the air.
Absolutely. It started to get a little cooler in the mornings this week, so
Yeah,
feels like football weather. So I'm looking forward to week 0. That's always kind of just a tease, really, but just to see some live football on TV again. That's not preseason NFL will be fun to see this weekend. So
absolutely.
let's jump right into it. On this episode, we're going to discuss the defense. A lot's changed since last season. Some things remain the same. We'll start on the front of the defense. A mainstay coming back in Mozzie Smith. But give me your thoughts on kind of that front group of interior defensive line for the 2022 Wolverines.
So it kind of feels a little like we felt maybe about the edges going into last season, where you've got a guy who is a kind of a bit of a known commodity, but is probably going to be put in more of a superstar role in Mozzie Smith. And you think he's going to be pretty good. You just don't know how good. Last year, that was Aiden and with the edges, and it turned out to be, one of the better seasons by a Michigan defensive player in modern Michigan history. And so you kind of know you have a bit of a known commodity in Mozzie Smith, whether he's like, anywhere from just a good player to an all-conference player to an all-American. It's kind of wait and see, but you feel good, really, really good about his spot. And then it's kind of the second and third, depending on, what package we've got on the field, interior D-line spots that you've got a lot of names that you felt good about as recruits, or in the glimpses that we've seen from them, they've looked good, but nobody has been in that full-time starting role. We were wondering last year who's going to play across from Aiden on the other edge spot. Well, this year, maybe a bit of a surprise, although he was, a highly rated recruit and played a lot of ball for Michigan. A bit of a surprise that Chris Hinton entered the draft early, so you got to fill, your main other interior D-line spot. And you're just wondering which of the guys that you kind of feel good about is going to step up. It could be Chris Jenkins taking over as, your full-time 3-tech. That could be Rayshon Benny, who's a big recruit, or it could be one of the big freshmen of Mason Graham. Kenneth Grant's probably more of a nose, but it could be Mason Graham there as well. So lot of familiar names and high expectations for the younger guys, but it's wait and see. First few games will get not great opponents. So you hope to get a lot of guys on the field, get some reps, and see who can play on Main Street.
Yeah, I think those first 3, maybe 4 games will be big on developing not only the roles on, for the starters, but also developing the depth a little bit. Guys like George Rooks, you mentioned Rashawn Benny, Mason Graham, getting Cam Good kind of more comfortable to a higher level of competition. I think both of us are anticipating when they're in base. I think we're anticipating Mike Morris to play inside. And I think Derek Moore, getting kind of down the depth chart a little bit. I think he will be a similar player to Morris. I think you can kind of expect those two to kind of function similarly in the defense. in that base look, I am anticipating more Smith Jenkins.
Mhm.
And then I would say probably backed by Rooks, Kenneth Grant, and Rashawn Benny, respectively, with the possibility of Cam Good getting some of the 2 reps at nose tackle. But I think when they're in that base front, I think while the depth is very young, I think the young guys are really talented. George Rooks, I don't think gets talked about enough. So I think they will push and they'll develop, especially over the course of that non-conference schedule, to where they're reliable backups come conference schedule. And I think it's reasonable to expect a big jump from Chris Jenkins. Truthfully, I thought he was ready a little quicker than I anticipated. I did not expect him to be to flash as much as he did last year. So I think there could be a realistic, he's continued to put on weight, continued to grow into his body a little bit. So I think it's realistic that he really takes a big leap this year.
Yeah, you could tell last year he really only got reps at 5 tech in base, but he really strong at the point of the attack. At whatever he played, like 275 last year, about kind of played above his weight. He gave Big Ten tackles everything they could handle when he was on the field. So that certainly think he can move inside from there and hold up just as well, now that we know he's gained 15, 20 pounds of muscle in the off season. Might be helpful just to take a quick step back and talk about, when we talk about front, when we talk about base, the 2 kind of front personnel groups that Michigan's going to spend most of their time in are what we call base. It's your 3-4. You're going to have 2 stand-up edges. You can call them bucks, jacks, whatever your term of choice is. And then your 3 interior D linemen, a 5 tech playing on the tackle, a nose tackle or 1 or 0 technique playing on the center, and a 3 technique that's going to be playing on the backside guard. And then the 4-man personnel front that we spent a plurality of our snaps in last year, just the 2 stand-up edges still. And you're going to lift one of those defensive linemen to get an extra defensive back on the field. So you probably normally play a 3 tech on one guard and a 2-eye on the inside of the other guard. So when we say base, we say nickel. That's the personnel group and the alignment that we're talking about.
Absolutely. And I thought it was interesting last year. If you watch Wisconsin or a lot of other 3-man front defenses, a lot of times when they go to their nickel fronts, they pull the nose tackle and just move the 2, defensive ends or defensive tackles, whatever, your terminology you want to call them. They just move those guys as their interior rushers in the nickel package. And Michigan actually kept Mozzie out there a large majority of the time in nickel. I mean, I don't remember him coming off very much at all. So that was a little bit unique that they kept the nose out there, but Mozzie is a little bit different than a lot of, their the standard or the thought of as standard 3-4 nose. Mozzie's a little bit more athletic than a lot of those guys. So, I mean, he was the number 1 freak on Bruce Feldman's list. So I should say he's a lot more athletic, but they kept him out there quite a bit. So, and I think that will continue this year. And, Morris will play kind of inside in that 3-4. And then when they go to the nickel front, I do think he'll be an edge, in the 4-man front. So sometimes, playing inside as well, but more so of an edge guy in the nickel front as opposed to their base. Anyone else you want to mention on that interior group? I think there's a lot of excitement about the freshmen. And there always is. I mean, every year the freshmen get a bunch of hype, but I think those two redshirt freshmen, George Rooks and Rashawn Benny, I'm expecting a lot from both of them. The scheme change was a huge benefit to both of those guys. I mean, they both fit this scheme very, very well. So, and any other notes on that interior group?
Well, that's exactly what I was just going to say about Rooks, Benny as well. As you said, this scheme change from the more even front, typical, 4-2-5 looks that Don Brown would run to this, odd front, whether you want to call it McDonald's scheme, the Ravens scheme, whatever. Rooks and Benny became huge recruitments for Michigan to win down the stretch because they're so typical, prototypical of this scheme, what you want in an interior defensive lineman. So I think especially now that we're looking at the depth chart, and now that we know we've landed a kid like a Mason Graham, Brooks, it seems especially important as you look to who's going to man that kind of 5-tech 4-eye, depending on how that position evolves over the next couple of years. Who's going to man that third defensive lineman position in our base look? And yeah, George Rooks it looked like a hell of a player in high school. Haven't got to see him in real substantial game action yet, but he's bulked up in the off season and he looks ready to be, whether you want to call him the next Jenkins, or if Morris does play with his hand in the dirt a little more this year, take over from Morris in 2023, but should get substantial rotational minutes this year, and could play a really, really big role. So Rooks, really looking forward to see him on the field. I feel good about Rashawn Benny, even though we've seen about the same amount of him as Rooks, just knowing what kind of player he was in high school, and seeing him from a body type standpoint, and knowing the coaching he's getting from Mike Elston. A lot of hype around him. Mason Graham, I loved him coming out of high school. It seems like they put enough weight on him such that he could potentially rep at both the 3-tech and the nose. He's up to, I think on the depth chart, he's listed at 317. So I think that's kind of the only other thing I have of note that interested me. I didn't necessarily anticipate Graham to play that heavy, but I'm sure it's, my fan brain is saying I'm sure it's all good weight, and he's kept his athleticism. So should be a nasty pairing with him and Grant when the time comes, whether that's this year or well into the future.
Yeah, that duo of those two moving forward, I don't think there are many players in the country that they could have got to fill those roles that I'd be more excited about together. And I do think, I think Kenneth Grant will take a little bit more time. I thought Mason Graham was closer to being ready to play coming out of high school, but Kenneth Grant's ceiling is just unlimited, really. He might be the type of nose that we would pull in nickel. But he is athletic enough to hang in there despite his size. So I think I'm
sure I'm the millionth person to say this, but his ceiling is probably Jordan Davis. I mean, it's the hot comparison after he just went the season, but I mean that he had and meant first round in the draft. But that's what Georgia would do, right? He was mostly a first and second down player,
right? Yeah, that was the knock on him coming out.
Yeah, you can make a lot of money being a first and second down player if you're that good at one.
Yes, absolutely. And I think this year for him will just be, hopefully if some flashes that really get you excited for next year. Because Mozzie could have another year, but with the preseason hype and how well he played last year, I just don't see that happening. So hopefully there's enough flash from Grant to really make you feel good about what's coming next year. from him. Uh, let's transition over to edge. That it's really part of the same group. All of the edge players for Michigan really will play on the line of scrimmage. They do move Jalen Harrell around a little bit, but outside of that, they're really part of the defensive front. Give me a little bit of the breakdown of how the two positions are a little different, and then who you expect to contribute at each position.
Yeah, so when you talk about base and nickel, we mentioned it briefly talking about the defensive tackles, but you'll see Mike Morris this year probably do a lot of standing up in nickel and then playing on a tackle with his hand in the dirt in a 3-point stance when we're in base. And that's when Jalen Harrell will be on the field. Jalen Harrell spent last year as Michigan's starting Sam whenever we were in a 3-4. Generally, Jalen Harrell was in that Sam role. And then when you're in nickel, you still have two standing edges. However, you're distinguishing less between the two body types versus when you're in base. We did tend to play Aiden Hutchinson to the weak side of the formation more often than not in nickel, but you would distinguish less between the two bucks in nickel versus the Sam and the buck in base. And generally, you're going to see Jalen Harrell as a Sam play in a 7 or a 9 on the outside shade on the end man line of scrimmage. And like you mentioned, he might flex out a little bit wider in his alignment and his technique, depending on the offense's personnel and alignment. If you got a tight end in the slot or like a bunch formation that side, he might line up a little bit wider over the number 2 or 3 receiver. The Ravens tend to do that more with their edges when they're in their base than Michigan did last year. But essentially, the Sam in your base is going to be a little more athletic, a little bit more of a credible zone drop coverage threat than an Aiden Hutchinson or than what we expect Mike Morris to be doing when we're in our nickel when he's standing up. So a little bit more athleticism, maybe a little smaller than who the coaches like to be the bucks in nickel from that Sam position, but it's pretty much a role that you're only going to see when we're in a 3 down lineman, 2 standing edges versus that nickel package.
Right. That Sam is what most would traditionally call like kind of that hybrid linebacker defensive end, more of a true hybrid, whereas the buck is more of a stand-up defensive end. I mean, they both function the same way, but it seems like whether it's playing Harrell there or what they're looking for in recruiting, the guys they seem to be targeting, it seems like you're a little bit shorter, play a little bit more off the ball in high school style linebacker. Ideally you'd have a 6'4", 6'5" guy that can still really run, but there's those guys don't grow on trees. So Jalen Harrell is pretty close from a college standpoint to a perfect fit for that role. And then one of the things I tried to focus on in my rewatch, over the summer was, what the kind of, you mentioned Aiden playing the weak side of the formation, trying to figure out what the rhyme or reason for which, when they went to nickel and it was 2 of more your traditional defensive end, with Aiden and Ojabo last year or Aiden and Upshaw last year, how they aligned. Was it to the formation, away from the formation? I noticed more of a trend to being field and boundary, where they put Aiden to the field a lot.
Yeah.
It seemed like, and this isn't, I don't have the stats to back it up, but it seemed like to me they really tried to use Dax and Aiden. Dax playing the nickel role and Aiden playing, the buck role. They really tried to use those guys to shut down, the harder portion of the field side, the wide side. They try to use those guys to shut that down, just given their talent level. I'm not sure that they'll do that this year, but that seemed to be a tendency last year. Like I said, I don't have the stats or the numbers to back that up, and I haven't seen any clinic, from them, but
that's how I had them labeled a couple of weeks ago. I put a little diagram on the MichiganInsider.com, and I actually labeled Hutch field there and Ojabo boundary. But again, like you said, I don't have the breakdowns in front of me either.
Yeah, I think ideally, you, like I said, you'd get to the point where you have a Sam that you don't lift in nickel. Right. In the NFL, when you're drafting guys specifically for that, the roles are a little bit more interchangeable. Same way on the interior defensive line, the 3 tech and the 5 tech for the Ravens were, Calais Campbell and Derek Wolfe. There's not a whole lot of difference there. One's a little taller, but from a skill set standpoint, they really were similar players. In college, it's, with recruiting, you're still picking your guys, but a little bit more specialization, maybe. I've said this a number of times, whether it's talking about recruiting or depth charts or what, but I really think it's 3 positions for Michigan, as we discussed, the Sam being the hybrid, and then 2 different bucks, or jacks, whatever you want to call them. So let's talk about, we talked about Harrell at Sam, the depth behind him. I see Tyler McLaurin playing there. I'm not sure if he's a great fit. They're going to try him out there, it sounds like, after playing inside linebacker some last year. And I really think the heir apparent there, at least right now, unless they would, land one in this 2023 class, I really think the heir apparent at Sam would be Micah Pollard, the true freshman there. Any disagreement there on the Sam depth chart?
No, not at all. And it sounds like Micah Pollard is doing well early on in this first fall camp. The only thing I would say is, and I totally agree, it is Michael Pollard, the future of that position, at least for the next 3 or 4 years here. But he came in listed a little smaller on the roster than what than I remember his recruiting profile being. I think he's listed at 6'2" and just over 200 pounds right now. That's not a big deal. You tend to like the 6'4" guys, but that you can put a little more weight on and maintain the athleticism. But like you said, that doesn't grow on trees, right? That's the dream. Right. The Isaiah Simmons don't come around, all the time. So, and I think the Ravens guys that they've played in this role have mostly been about 6'2". They'll just bulk them up to 250.
Right.
And, they're freaks, but yeah.
Right. In the NFL, those guys are 250, 255. I think for Michigan, I think it will be more like 6'2" to 6'4" and 240 to, 235 to 250, probably the biggest.
Yeah.
And I do remember for Pollard specifically, I remember it being mentioned that he was, the easy term for it, I guess, is long. So it's a little bit easier to put some weight on those type of guys. The height obviously kind of correlates to that, or usually correlates to that. But if he's, a long 6'2", that, he could easily be 230, 235 by next fall. And remember, Harrell is only a redshirt sophomore. And he's really not playing what I would call a premier position currently. So I would expect him to be around for at least 4 years, if not the full 5. So Pollard has some time
Mm-hmm.
to get up to weight there, and um, we'll see on McLaurin that one seems to be, especially if Pollard is, kind of seen as the heir apparent, that could be getting late early for Tyler McLaurin. So
Mm-hmm.
let's move to the Bucks there a little bit. I'm personally expecting, at least at the start of the year, when they go to nickel with two Bucks on the field, I'm expecting Upshaw to play with Morris. One of the things I noticed running through some snap count things, that Taylor Upshaw actually played more than Chris Jenkins last year.
Yeah.
Which I thought was surprising to see that number. But then when you rewatch, I mean, first 6 games, Upshaw was a mainstay in the defense, really, not what Aiden was, but he played a lot early in the season. So I'm anticipating him being the other starter. Solid run defender. We'll see if he can develop more as a pass rusher. He was relatively new to football when Michigan recruited him. So maybe there is still some upside there. What are your thoughts on Upshaw and some of the other Bucks? Potentially pushing him or moving Morris, keeping Morris inside on nickel.
Yeah. So what you noticed in the snap counts and rewatching last year is what I was going to touch on. It seems like, and this is no, I don't mean this as a knock on Upshaw, but he started, his snap count was front loaded on last year's schedule, right? And it seems kind of like he is the high floor, like safe starter position, pick for the position. Like you said, he's a solid run defender. He's a bigger guy. He's not, as twitchy as Aiden was or as Ajabo was, but he's safe to throw out there while you're figuring things out. I kind of think the coaches would like to see his snap count trend like it did last year, where at some point during the year, it clicks for a Braden McGregor. It clicks for a TJ Guy or a Yabi Anoma maybe later in the year. But I fully agree. I anticipate Upshaw will be your starter, and until someone can play the run as well as he does and give you a little more pass rush, he'll hold the majority of the snaps at one of the Buck spots. And then, Morris, certainly early downs will be your other Buck in nickel. Morris is a guy that the coaches just clearly trust, even when his role wasn't, he wasn't as versatile of a player last year, and certainly wasn't as explosive as your two main Bucks last year. The coaches found ways to get him on the field. He made plays. He had an interception against Michigan State on a tipped ball. He tipped a huge pass, a huge play against Ohio State. I want to say it was third down, but Olave was wide open on an easy short completion that would have forced a tackle on Chris Olave in space. And Morris, being a giant dude, got a finger on the ball and got us off the field. So fully anticipate Morris to be standing up at least on early downs. But like we talked about with the defensive tackles, you could very well see Michigan start lifting Mozzie Smith this year when we go to nickel and sliding Morris inside. Morris did gain, I want to say 20 pounds this offseason, but he's over 290 pounds now, more than capable of playing next to Jenkins on passing downs in nickel. And that's when you could get a more twitchy guy like, maybe that's McGregor. Maybe that's TJ Guy. Maybe that's you bring Harrell back out for a NASCAR type package. You hope Iyabi Anoma, the very new transfer, can at some point in the season be a pass rush specialist at the least. But I think just overall thoughts on this Buck group. I don't know if you agree, but this is probably my greatest concern for the team this year. It's hard to overstate the impact that two, first round draft pick, All-American level, however you want to categorize them, players that Ojabo and Hutchinson gave Michigan last year, especially against the more talented teams that you play. And Michigan in this Buck group has a lot of big, strong guys that'll play well against the run, that, can maybe push the pocket, more of a bull rush type. But, at 290, I don't know what Upshaw is playing at. And I think he's in the 260s, but he's a burlier guy. They're not edge benders. They're not guys who the best offensive tackles on Michigan's schedule are going to fear beating them with speed. So this group generally is the ceiling of this group is the biggest question, biggest concern, however you want to phrase it, for this defense for me this year. It'll be a great group on early downs and against the run, but who is going to step up and create, the pass rush? I don't think either of us expect it to be on the level of 2021, but somewhere close, somewhere that offenses have to game plan around.
Yeah, I think that's very well said. I think this group will be good. It's just a matter of, can they, completely change game plans? Can they, can they be great? And I think, I think Upshaw will be the early down guy for sure. I think you said it backwards on Morris. I think we expect Morris's hand in the dirt early downs and standing up in nickel.
Yes. Sorry, I meant if we see Morris, let's say you're in nickel for the entire series, the entire set of downs, whatever. The early downs would be when Morris is standing up in nickel, and then if you got into a third and long, you might see Morris slide inside and nickel to pass rush to bring someone else on. But if we're in base, yes, absolutely. I think Morris is in the 3-point. Yep.
Yeah. So, and I think this group will, you touched on all the points, but I think they will be good. It's just a matter of, can they be great? I mean, and, I think there's a real possibility that we see similar to last year, where early in the year, you're seeing a ton of Upshaw and Harrell in base, and then Upshaw and Morris in nickel, and then either Upshaw has gotten a lot better from last year, or someone like a McGregor, a TJ Guy, Julius Welshkoff, maybe even Iyabi Anoma, just someone by mid-season really steps up in that pass rushing role. I think they will continue keeping the nose in, keeping, just because it's Mozzie, just because he's their best player. So I think they would be pulling Jenkins when they went to nickel, but they hypothetically they could pull both, and like the packages you're talking about, you could have a Morris and an Upshaw interior, and one of the things I wanted to mention on Upshaw, I think he's one of the guys. We mentioned Rooks, the scheme change helping. I think Taylor Upshaw is one of them that it hurt the most. Some of these edges, Taylor Upshaw, we'd be talking probably about being a pretty solid anchor returning on, that defensive line, depending if they kept Aiden there or not. But we'd be talking about him at the anchor position. Like, that's really solid. He's really good at that role. But now that he's asked to do a little bit more from a pass rush standpoint, he's a question mark, So I think he's a fine player. McGregor will be very interesting. His knee injury, I think, really set him back. I think you said it well with the coaches. if you got them in an honest conversation, they would want him to be overtaking it. But I just don't know how far along he is. I think we will see some Derek Moore as an edge rusher as well. I mentioned earlier, I expect him to be utilized the same way that Mike Morris is. So, yeah, good players there. And just we'll have to see if anybody can elevate, especially from a pass rushing standpoint, elevate to great. Maybe it happens early in the season, but maybe we'll have to wait until kind of mid-season to see where they're at there. I expect a big rotation early in the year just to kind of see what they obviously see it every day in practice, but see what it's like, come game time, what these guys can all do and where their skill sets fit in the best.
Yep.
Anything else on the front?
No, just glad you mentioned Juice. I forgot to talk about Julius Welch. Lost 20 pounds this offseason to be able to stand up. One of the bigger surprises when the new roster came out. So he's 25. He's been around a while. He's Aiden's roommate and best friend on the team. So maybe he's the guy. So good to mention him. Yeah, like you said, they'll rotate early and try to get the highest upside group out there.
Yeah, and I think regarding Anoma, I think we've talked about it a lot off air, but we're trying to keep it kind of intentionally brief there. Obviously, he has a ridiculous physical ceiling. It's just hard to really project anything there. Come November, we could be talking about, Michigan's developed another edge into a freak, or he may not contribute at all. So it's just, there's so much variance with him. It's just hard to really discuss too much. And I think Juice is kind of the same way. I mean, Juice, there's a couple guys, him, Juice and Anoma, and you could probably lump Braden McGregor into this group as well, that could really take this unit, the pass rush unit, to close to elite levels. I'll say, great, level, but there's so much variance and different kind of variance with all three that it's just difficult to pick one over, one out of the three and just say, I'm certain it'll be this guy.
Yeah. The last little thing just crossed my mind. In the coaching turnover this offseason, one of the bigger losses, I think Michigan fans mostly recognize this, but was Brian Osborne, highly regarded as a rising star in the coaching industry. McDonald took him, but not a coincidence, with him to the Ravens. And we didn't really replace the role. Osborne was not an on-field assistant, but his role was working specifically with the edges. And Nua was your D-line coach last year. Now it seems, and I don't think you had Dylan Roney as an analyst last year as well. He's back, and you obviously replace Coach Nua with Coach Elston, and you feel great about Coach Elston, but you didn't replace Ryan Osborne, at least to my knowledge. So it'll be interesting, something to think about. Maybe not necessarily this year. I think if you saw the effects of it this year, they would probably be bad. So hopefully you don't notice it this year, but long term, that's probably a role you want to replace it. We talked about this off air as well. You would generally rather split D-line coaching duties if you're going to run a 3-4 between your tackles and your edges versus, splitting. Currently, Michigan has 3 defensive backs coaches between Klink, Jay, and Minter, the DC. So hopefully you get a more dedicated, pass rusher, edge coach, whatever you want to label it in the future. But Ryan Osborne, quietly a big loss for this staff.
Yeah, I did notice actually, and I can't remember if it was the Big Ten Network's coverage or if it was one of the Michigan football videos they released, but I did notice that Minter was with the edges during individual.
Okay.
So, and someone had reported it. I want to say it was on three, Chris Ballas, but someone had reported as well that he was taking a personal, challenge or whatever upon himself to take over that position, and give them his, undivided attention when they went individual and things like that.
Okay.
So that's something I think, kind of shows that the importance of it, as you mentioned, with losing Osborne, and also the fact that, Minter sees himself, we knew he was a versatile guy, but sees that position as important enough in the defense to take it over himself. I do think you hit on it a little bit, but once Jay becomes the head coach, Jay Harbaugh becomes the head coach this offseason, I do think Minter will move back to safeties and they will hire an edge guy. But that's for the offseason, really. And that's it for the defensive preview for Contown. This is Matt. Thanks for joining us again. And we'll be back next week for week one preview.